Good morning, LinkedIn. My name is Joel Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Practical Leadership, an opportunity for you to learn more about how to be an effective leader and build leadership habits into your daily work. If you are tuning in live or watching the recording, please say hello in the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if you joined us last week for our session on productivity with Laura Creston, I'd love it if you'd share how you've gained more control over your calendar this week. So don't be shy.
The time is 10 a.m.
I guess the time is 10 a.m. Sorry, guys. Don't be shy. Jump in. We'd love to see who's here. And as you come in, we'd love to hear more about what you've been working on. So during these sessions, if you haven't participated before, we tackle real leadership topics and challenges, encourage you to apply what you're learning, and provide actionable steps to build your own leadership practices in how you lead your team. So I've asked leadership experts from around the world to join me to provide their own perspectives and experience. And today I'm excited to be joined by Evan Smith from Metamorphosis Management Group in Providence, Rhode Island. Evan supports leaders and their teams in the journey toward change and growth. Thanks for joining me, Evan. It's great to see you again.
Joel, it's great to see you too. Thanks for the invite. And somehow, you said you invite leadership experts. I'm delighted I slipped through your filter there.
Yeah, it's always good to have folks from the U.S. as well. I've gotten a fair amount of cajoling from folks that I only bring Canadians on the program, but I know Rhode Island isn't that close to Canada, so we'll take you.
Thank you.
So our topic today is asking real questions, and I think this topic is critical for anyone who leads both people or projects. And as you and I were talking, I mean, really anybody that's a human because of the interactions that we have every day. And I'm excited to get your thoughts on it. But before we get started, I just want to reinforce again to the folks watching today how much we'd love to get your active comments in the comment section. So if you've got questions, you've got experiences that you want to share or perspectives, please share those along the way. If you're watching the recording, do the same. We will try to get to any questions that you have today during the session, but if not, we will follow up after the session is complete. So I probably have rambled on long enough. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Awesome. So Evan, in some of our other sessions on practical leadership, we've discussed the importance of asking good questions as we lead other people. But your focus today, or the topic for the day really was about asking real questions. So what do you mean by real questions?
Yeah. Real is a shorthand for a question that is genuine and intentional, and that is purpose fulfilling. And I'll say more about that later. But this topic and our conversations on this earlier was really prompted for me by recalling a conversation I had with a friend a long time ago who was telling me about a conversation with her husband. And they had an active debate about whether he was asking her a real question. And she said to him that a real question is a question you're prepared to hear yes or no or anything in between two. And it's really about sort of a question that's open enough that you as an asker are prepared for anything that comes forward.
Huh. And I would think not all of us are ready to have those kind of conversations, right?
Well, I think I'll speak for myself, and I'm guessing that folks listening in may have some experience with this. We're walking around all the time with an agenda running in our heads, some things that we're thinking about, our own to-do list, hopes, dreams, and desires. And a lot of times those things sort of make their way into a question that's shaped in a certain way that suits our ends or our aims, and that may not be ultimately, I don't like this word so much, but optimized for the purpose that really is ideal. And there's some ways to sort of improve that process of asking the question, of getting ready and then asking the question, that I think can lead to better outcomes.
Yeah. So when you talk about, kind of asking questions in a specific manner, are you talking about leading questions or what do you mean there?
Well, that's certainly one great example, right? If I'm walking around with, and especially if you're engaged with other people trying to get work done, I'm walking around with what I think the expectations are for my organization. I might be approaching someone and checking in on what's the status of X, right? Or tell me what you've done on Y, which is really about sort of me responding to what might be my own anxiety about completion or readiness, and ultimately a reflection on me when some consideration might lead me to say, I'd really love it if John um, shared his thinking with me about the work he's doing on Y. So if I'm going to do that, I might not say the best question might not be tell me where you are on Y. There might be a better question.
Yeah. I think that can be a struggle, right? So if I'm a leader and I'm responsible for the results of my team, and I'm trying to stay on track or at least stay on top of what's going on, it can be hard for me not to ask leading questions. But as you talk about those questions, um, what should I stay away from? You mentioned
Mm,
give me a status update, but what are some other things that I may ask and inadvertently not realize that I'm asking a leading question, taking them down a certain path?
right, right. Well, any of the leading questions where so one of the great examples is um, getting in conversation with someone, sort of connecting in to one element that they say, and because I've made a connection and suddenly I'm having empathy around that one thing they've said, we start playing a version of name that tune, right? I recognize something, I leap on it, and all of a sudden I'm directing the conversation around this thing that I'm familiar with, this topic that's I have some familiarity with, and the conversation has become about me and my interest rather than about them, and again, what might be an optimal question or an optimal conversation.
Yeah. So you're saying I probably shouldn't go into the conversation with, "Hey John, have you thought about doing this?" That seems very directive, right?
It's what um, my friend and colleague Michael Bungay Stanier would say is not a real question. That's an example of not a real question. That's advice masquerading as a question.
Right.
Yeah, and we think it, and it's hard because in the moment, real time, sometimes we know we're supposed to ask a question, and you can feel the leaning forward uh, coming around what you want to say, and then we hope that by putting a question mark at the end, it somehow makes it okay. But it's really we need to call it what it is. It's advice masquerading as a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I'll maybe take this in a different direction, not just inside of work, but I think as parents we struggle with this as
Mm,
well, right? I've got two adult children. Um, love my children dearly, but at times when they're in the midst of a problem, or they are trying to sort through some things, the questions that I ask are probably more leading than I would like them to be. And part of it, I think, is a desire to kind of help them get through it as quickly as possible or share my experience. Or at times it's I want to save them from the mistakes that I've made.
yes.
But it can, because it feels so directive, it can also feel pretty inauthentic that we're not really having a conversation, that they're listening to a lecture or me preach about something.
Yes.
Do you have any
Yes.
examples of that, whether it be in your personal life or other personal examples, or in your professional life, where you realize partway through that, boy, I've taken this down a path and I've removed them from really being part of the conversation or the solution?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly have my own examples with my own son, who's now 25, but when he was in his mid-teens, I was having an experience very much like the one you described. I was sort of much more directive, I think, responding to my own anxiety about what I saw or didn't see going on. And the great example that many can perhaps connect with is, are the chores getting done, and what does that say about my son's motivation, and so I immediately I'm on a path, heading in a certain direction. Um, it was it was anxiety provoking in a different way, but also liberating to get to the place one day where I asked him a question that really was more open ended and less motivated, and it actually began to open up a different sort of conversation together. And that leads me into one, an observation. There's a lot of interesting research in the social sciences about what happens when we don't ask real questions, when
Hmm.
we ask leading questions, when we start offering advice prematurely. We actually limit the building of trust, the deepening of relationships, the creation of empathy. And that to me is the when we think about what the opportunity is here. For most of us, we're looking for more engagement, more collaboration, more, you know, we're looking for more great thinking and more great energy from the people around us, whether it's at home or at work. And really being intentional about the way we frame our questions and what we do with them is in service of creating that and getting to the next level, really. Um, there's one more. I've been going on here a little bit. There's one more lovely example that someone in a workshop shared with me about a year ago, and he told me after completing this workshop, he had actually gone back home to his spouse, and they began a practice of every Friday night, beginning the weekend with the question to each other, "What's on your mind?" So, what's on your mind right now? And it was an invitation that was so open and unmotivated, and he said it led them into a sort of a lovely deepening of their relationship.
Huh.
They did it for years, he told me later.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually when you talked about Michael Bungay Stanier, one of the coaching questions, the coaching habit, some of the questions he throws out there. I think one of them is kind of the what's on your
What's
mind or
on
what.
your mind? Yeah, it's the opening question. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. A lot of the work I do in coaching and around organizations and the way that they work with their people. We have employee engagement surveys. We do pulse surveys. We do all these things to try to solicit feedback from our
Mhm.
employees and understand how things are going. And we reinforce with the leaders a lot, like, hey, you should be asking your team for their perspective and their thoughts. I think they mean well, but often when they go to do that, they aren't actually asking for perspectives and thoughts. They're asking for agreement. And
Right.
so this whole piece of it's not even always a leading question. It's um, I've framed the conversation in such a way that no matter what question I ask, there is an expected answer, right? Or
Yes. Yes.
I've set the stage around this is how we're going to do things. And so my questions, even if it is, Evan, what's your perspective on that? I've kind of created a corner that they've been pushed into where the only right answer is whatever I think Evan wants me to say, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and here's the thing, we're in these relationships with people, people we may be supervising or on our teams, et cetera. We work with them over time. They learn what our habits and patterns are, and if let's say you and I have been working together for a long time, and and that regardless of what you say, I'm always going to come in at the end with my advice. At a certain point, you're just going to sit back and wait for me to do it because that's what I always do.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And it's that delay, right? It's the, hey, does anybody have any questions or thoughts or perspectives? And everybody's waiting for you to eat
Hmm.
up that silence again.
That's
And
right.
from my own experience, I'll tell you, I struggled with this very early on in my career as a manager. And again, maybe it goes back to that fatherly response to your
Hmm.
kids of just like, hey, I want to tee this up. I want you to get involved. I want you to be engaged. But at the first sign of silence or where folks may not have been sure, it was easy for me to jump in and just be like, okay, then
Yes.
I think we should do this. And so now that we
Yes.
know that we're going to do that, Evan, you do this, John, you do this, Susan, you take this, and we're all going to be on the same page. And it did come out of that kind of that anxiety piece that you mentioned earlier, which is,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure things go well and that we're all on the same page. The problem with it is I would walk away from those meetings feeling good, and everybody else walked away from those meetings not feeling great.
Right. Right. And
Um,
and that doesn't that sort of thing, as you no doubt know, doesn't advance your relationship with folks. It doesn't deepen it,
yeah.
in a meaningful way.
So let's get to the meat and potatoes. So for a guy like me who just said, at one point in my career I struggled with this. If I came to you today and said, "Boy, I really struggle with this, Evan," how could you help me start asking more real questions with my team?
Right. So there's a couple of things, and I'm happy to I can do this later. A couple of short steps that I can drop into the comments. But the thing that I would encourage people to focus on, or encourage you to focus on, if that was the conversation we were in, is to be clear before you speak about what is your real desired outcome
Hmm.
from this encounter, right? What is it you really want? And so how do you prepare yourself to get to what you really want? Because your approach, your question will be different if ultimately, to go back to the example earlier, your desired outcome is I want to deepen my relationship with John and really better understand how he's approaching the problem solving, rather than I want to know what the status of the project is.
Yeah.
So it's really about putting your own mask on first and understanding where you are and what your desired outcome is. That's the one thing I would say, single most important thing.
Yeah, I like that because in some ways the real question is getting real with ourselves, right?
Yes.
Getting real with, and I hadn't thought about that before. Really, what's the purpose behind what I'm saying? Is it to get to a quick solution, or
Hmm.
is it to tee up a sandbox for us to come up with a solution together? I love that.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's exactly right. In the short run, and I think there's a fellow named Judson Brewer who's done a lot of work on habit change. He's an addiction researcher actually here at Brown University, and he's written a book called Unwinding Anxiety. He talks about anxiety as a habit loop. Part of what we're up to with unreal questions is relieving our own anxiety, and that because it's the first most seductive thing at hand, it's sort of that's what's driving us. We're going to have to actively take a step back to shift the pattern that we're in,
Huh.
so that we're not responding to that first trigger around anxiety, whatever that is for each of us.
Very good. I'm realizing we're having some sort of technical difficulty on our end with
Hmm.
seeing comments from folks. So I'm going to take a quick pause here
Okay.
and see if I can open those up. There we go. I'm just opening these up on LinkedIn, guys. So I apologize that I'm looking all around. But as we think about this topic, we've got a couple of comments here. Now we've frozen again. Un momento, por favor. Technology doesn't always work the way we'd like. Here we go. So Kathy K has got some great suggestions on the types of questions that we can ask, and some of these I think you've experimented with yourself. But tell me the story behind that, or
I love that.
what problems are you trying to solve for? So instead of saying, "Here's what the solution is," what are you trying to solve for? I love that. Deb Williams is saying that this is a great process for kids too. So
Yes.
um, it's so much better than "How was your day?" That how was your thinking, or what are you thinking about, or those types of things. Megan Salser says, when someone tells me about an incident, I like to follow up with, "How did that make you feel?" Or
Mm,
"What are your thoughts surrounding that?" My experiences or feelings surrounding something may be very different than the person approaching me. I think that understanding that our perspective and their perspective may not be the same
yes.
is powerful. I think many of us do expect there's going to be groupthink, that we're all going to be on the same page, and
Yes.
So I love that, Megan. Thanks for sharing it. I will keep these open for another couple minutes if you do have questions that you think you'd like us to tackle. But as we do that, Evan, I'm thinking about this more and more, and I want to maybe tee it up a little bit differently. So if I
Mm,
was going to work with someone on a team, coach them around maybe their propensity to jumping in too early with a solution instead of asking good questions.
mm,
As we think about those kind of simple steps that they could do to move in that right direction, where would you just ask them to start? I know there's
yeah.
a lot of things they could do, but what would you suggest they start with?
Yeah. So first one, the step that we mentioned earlier, getting clear about what my purpose is in that encounter. What's my desired optimal outcome purpose with this person. And second, second step, make sure that based on what I hope for as an outcome from that conversation, that the surrounding conditions are right. Um, are we sort of talking with each other face to face? Is it in my office if I'm the supervisor, or do I go to their office? Um, do I expose my own thinking sort of in advance to suggest why I want to ask the question as a way of getting someone engaged with me? So there's some, I would say, setting condition environment setting that's useful as step two. Um, what's my third step? Is my partner ready to have a conversation? Right? What's their Are they under a deadline? Is this a good time? Right? Did my kid wake up sick this morning and therefore I'm worried about, school care, et cetera. So it might not be a right time for them checking that out. Um, I've got a good open-ended question framed and ready, and I love the ones that are popping in here in the comments. And if this is a really important conversation, this is the last thing. My encouragement is I've actually practiced asking this question, maybe on my drive to work or in the bathroom mirror, or tried it out at home first, so that I've got a feel for how it sounds as it comes out. Is this really the question I want to ask in service of the purpose that I named up front?
Yeah. And I would echo that, quite often when I'm working with new leaders and experienced leaders too, but folks that have to go and have a coaching conversation with somebody who may be struggling to meet expectations, one of the things we talk about is, are you prepared for that conversation? And
Yeah.
to your point, what questions do you want to ask and why? I will often encourage them, if not only just, say them to the mirror or say them out loud enough times that you get comfortable with them, but to also be thinking about, is there somebody else, a trusted colleague, your spouse, whomever
Yeah.
else, that you can, and people hate the word role playing, but just more, is there somebody that you could say, okay, I need to have this conversation with Tim. I'm not sure how it's going to go, and I want to ask some questions, but I want to make sure they're going to be received in the right way. Here's what I'd like to ask, and just get feedback from somebody. And well, boy, if you ask me that question, I would think that you're really leading me down that path, so that you can modify it before you start.
That's right. That's right. And well, and I guess in the service of going through that preparation that you're describing, you're ready for actual alternatives. Like there might be, we imagine somebody's going to respond a certain way. You can start to imagine there might be other ways they would respond or other things they might go to. So all of the preparation is going to help you to have a better conversation that leads you more towards the outcome that you're seeking.
Yeah. I want to catch a couple more comments that came in.
Yeah.
Charlie says, but that trigger is usually subconscious. I think he was talking about kind of this anxiety.
Yes.
So would it be helpful for individuals to understand how that subconscious triggers, how those triggers are at play for them?
Yeah. That I agree with that. A lot of times it is subconscious. Um, and the single best way for getting at that is really and this is not a plug for meditation per se, but mind, at least sort of some sort of check-in process with yourself around your states. both physical state, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and emotional state, what is present for me right now? What is the feeling in my gut? What's my sense about, as I anticipate this the encounter with this other person, what's the emotional sense that I'm carrying with me about that?
Right.
um, so I think that it's not the full sort of unpacking of the subconscious or unconscious that Charlie is suggesting. But I think there's ways to gain access to parts of that that again are going to serve the deepening of your relationship with this other person, because they'll help you with preparation.
Right. Good. We had one last comment. Actually, two comments. Catherine Harrison has a great idea on how to get yourself comfortable. She said, even record it on your phone and listen back to
Oh,
it.
I
How
love
does it
that.
sound to you?
Yes.
Just this opportunity to hear yourself speak and go, man, that's not how I meant it. It sounded different in my head. How do I need to
Right.
craft it? I think that's a
Yeah.
great one.
So here's a quick. I love that too. And what's really important about that, I have a good friend who did his PhD in innovation at MIT, and his thesis was on explication. And his I'll spare you the details of his research, but the takeaway from it was his observation that thinking processes, or different parts of a thinking process, are activated when we hear ourselves talking, that are not activated in any other way. When and I'm an introvert, right? So I have this experience all the time. I say something out loud for the first time and I realize, oh, that's not right. Right. Let me try that again. Doing what Catherine's suggesting there is a great way to sort of help yourself get to the best intent, right? Around this purpose that I want to fulfill.
Yeah. And then the last comment that I'm seeing here before we wrap up, Megan mentions that something that's helped her when someone comes to her to talk about something, is asking if they want to actually just talk about the problem and try to
Yeah.
solve it, or if they just want to vent, right, and have her
I love
listen.
that. Yeah.
And I think that's where, as we move in, and I'll use a group setting, if we're in a team meeting and somebody brings up an issue or has a question, sometimes it is just helpful with the group to say, okay, well, do we want to problem solve that now? Or do we just need to kind of get all the information out on the table so people understand it better? Or not so much have a pity party, but can we support or encourage each other in the midst of that
Yeah.
issue? So that's a great one
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I love that. And before we close, Joel, I have one quote from a past client and friend that might be useful to share if you want to understand what some of the implications around doing this well might be. So whenever the time is right for that, it might work as part of the closing.
Oh, let's take it right now. I'd love to
Okay.
hear it.
All right. So this is a fellow who was, I mean, he worked in a Fortune 50 company, but he was running a group of several hundred people in technology. And this is his quote verbatim. I really powerful. I realized I needed to make a shift. I realized that my people were waiting for me to tell them what to do, even though they know what to do. This was a pattern we had built. I set the agenda. I run the meetings. And I knew we needed to create a different approach, not an agenda or a task list, but create a conversation. I started asking more questions, including questions that started with the words, I wonder. I wonder what it'll take for this to really work, for example. I wonder what owning this really looks like. He said this behavior changed us as a team from me killing ideas, looking for the fatal flaw all the time, to soliciting more ideas and listening to people. Suddenly, we had dozens of leaders.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Leaders building leaders. That's fantastic. Well, as we close today, as I always say during the end of these sessions, a lot of people use LinkedIn in a lot of different ways. And what we're trying to do with this program is actually use it for a catalyst for action for you, potentially accountability for you, to know that here's something that I should do. It's another thing to actually go out and do it. So you've invested the time today to learn more about how to be an effective leader, and specific to this topic of asking real questions. But as you know, if you don't actually do anything with what you've learned today, your investment of time is going to be completely wasted. So with that in mind, I want you to identify one thing that you're going to commit to doing over the next 7 days to take your leadership to the next level. And so that could be a very small thing. It's a very small habit you're trying to build in. Maybe it's something you've already been working on but want to double down on. But once you have that, I'd like you to drop it in the comments. What is it that you plan to work on over the next 7 days? And when we get together for next week's session, I'd love for you to share how things went and any successes that you've had along the way. So take 15 seconds now, drop that into the chat. I'm looking forward to seeing what you put in there. But while you do that, I want to thank you, Evan, for a fantastic conversation today. I think it's an extremely important topic, and yeah, I've appreciated your perspective and some of your experience along the way. So thank you.
Joel, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I love where the conversation's gone.
Yeah,
Look forward
perfect.
to more. Thank you.
Well, if you want to get a hold of Evan and hear more about his work, I'd encourage you to reach out to him on LinkedIn and follow some of his posts. He has some fantastic content he's been putting out, and I've heard from him. He's going to have some fantastic stuff coming, so keep an eye on that. But that does bring us to next week. Our guest for next week is Matt Harris. He's the principal consultant at CTY Group in Queensland, Australia. And he'll be joining us to explore how we connect people and process and purpose to really drive effectiveness in the workplace. So if you're in a process-heavy environment, whether that be in an office environment or a production environment, you're going to want to mark your calendar to join us for that conversation. So keep an eye out for the LinkedIn event posting, or if you'd like, drop a comment into the comment section to have me personally invite you. And I'll do so that you don't miss it. And if you're willing, please invite a friend who you think might benefit from it. We've seen a number of folks join, kind of a friend of a friend of a friend, and that's been awesome to get these concepts out to more people. If you have stumbled upon this video and we aren't connected on LinkedIn, please send me a connection request. Mention that you saw today's program, and we'll remedy that. So again, I want to encourage you to take something that you heard from this session and put it into practice as soon as today so that you can be the leader that your team needs right now. But regardless, I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you again next week. Thank you. Blessings.